We have Nick Jesson, who is our master of all things technical. If you are having problems, reach out to him in the chat. During the meeting and the presentation, we ask that you hold your questions, but you could be putting them into the chat. And when the time comes for discussion, you can join sharing your questions either by chat or by raising your hand, and you will be recognized at that time. Hoping that nobody has any problems, I want to go forward with the meeting. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 4 territory, original and traditional lands of the Naheawak Cree, the Saulteaux, Assiniboine, and Métis nations. We welcome those who join us from other traditional Indigenous territories. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm your moderator. My name is Christine Burton, and I'm a member of the Ecumenical Steering Group. We have two speakers today, Dr. Laura Alary and Reverend Traci Smith. Dr. Alary is a writer, educator in both Christian life and in the Montessori system, a librarian, but not of just any library, but as coordinator of the McKay Educational Resource Centre at Knox College, Toronto, where the center focuses on faith formation and congregational life. And she still managed to raise 3 creative and caring children. Laura is an acclaimed writer, authoring books that help children think about the big questions, including learning to be a giver rather than a taker in society, all of which ideally position her to be part of today's discussion. She's joined by Reverend Traci Smith. Traci's an ordained Presbyterian minister and author of 3 best-selling books, including Faithful Families, Creating Sacred Moments at Home. Traci also raised 3 children. I respect both of them immensely, and uses her wisdom and experience to help families find ways to creatively practice their faith at home and in the world. Pro tip, Traci has a weekly newsletter, Treasure Box Tuesday, providing resources, links, and inspirations. You can sign up today. Free plug. Welcome, and our thanks to both of you, Laura and Traci, and thanks to all of you who are attending today. Our agenda today will begin with an opening prayer, a presentation then by Laura and Traci, discussion, comments, and questions through chat and by discussion through raising your hand, and then a closing prayer. For our opening prayer, I call on Reverend Susan Anholt. She's a member of the Ecumenical Stewardship Planning Committee and a priest in the Anglican Diocese of Qu'Appelle, serving in Keniston. Susan.
Let us pray. Thank you, God, for your walk with us. We thank you for your presence in our lives. Reshape us where needed, Lord, until in generosity, in faith, and in the expectation that the best is yet to come, that we are truly Christ-like. Give us courage to give of ourselves and teach our children as you have shown us, for the good of all people and all your creation. Make us passionate followers of Jesus. Make our churches places of radical discipleship and signposts to heaven. Then in us, through us, and if need be, despite us, let your kingdom come. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Susan. And now we'll turn it over to Laura and Traci. I remind folks to please make sure that you mute yourself. The small sounds that may come through your microphone can be magnified in the process. And it's over to you, Laura and Traci.
Thank you, Christine, for the warm welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure for us to be here today. Traci and I always love to collaborate, so we'll take any opportunity to be in conversation with one another. And We're particularly glad, well, I'll just keep talking while Traci gets the slides up. We're particularly glad to talk about gratitude as a spiritual discipline that belongs to every season of our lives. No matter how old we are or how young we are, giving is integral to our identity as followers of Jesus. So to keep things there's so much that could be said. So to keep things focused and to respect everyone's time today, Traci and I have chosen to focus on 3 facets of giving. First of all, giving as gratitude or response to grace, response to what we have received. Giving as repair, mending, or an effort to mend things that are broken in our world. And finally, giving as mutuality or participation in a pattern of gracious exchange that is modeled for us by Jesus. So over the next half hour or so, we'll explore each of those 3 aspects or facets of giving, suggest some practices that can be used to embody them. And I get to talk about picture books, which I always love to do. So I will recommend some books for children that you can use to help deepen and extend the conversation. And Traci, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Well, wonderful. I would like to say thank you as well, Laura. Thanks for the invitation. As Laura said, we love to just play together, and for us, talking about faith formation is like playtime. And so I'll just say to you, Laura, given that we are friends, if I need to advance the slide or something, just do like move it or something so that I know, I think I know where we're going, but I'm driving the slides. So you won't offend me if you're just like wave or shout at me. I'm going to be focusing on practices that have to do with those 3 areas that Laura mentioned, practices where I make my happy place in this space. And so the practices that I'm sharing with you are all designed to sort of be incorporated either at the family level or for you to teach for your congregation. And then there are a couple that are very specifically just for the congregation. So you'll see more about that as we get going. Here we go. Is this where we need to be slide-wise, Laura?
Yes.
Giving us gratitude. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I don't actually see you. I'm just seeing your slide. Is that how it is for you as well?
Well, I can see my people on the side, but I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. Just carry on.
Yeah. Okay. Am I going first?
You're going first.
Oh, you said you were introducing each of these. Okay. Well, then I'm going first. Okay. So giving is gratitude. The idea of this one is giving out of the abundance of the first fruits that we've been given. Whenever I think about giving from a spiritual context, I do like to think about first fruits that we give out of the abundance that we've been given. And so the 3 practices that I have for you are, and actually, I'm trying to think if I should stop sharing so that you can see my face because I don't have any slides. Well, we'll just go with this. I'm going to stop sharing because there's
as the speaker, you're a primary face down at the bottom.
Am I still okay? I'll just go back and share the slides when it's time to do that. So the 3 practices that I had with regard to sharing giving us gratitude. The first one comes from my friend Amelia Dress. She wrote a book called The Hopeful Family, and she talks about giving a favorite things box. And before I tell you about that, I wanted to tell you a brief story about my grandfather, who was in charge of a food pantry growing up, and we would visit him maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And one of the visits, I was maybe 6 or 7, we went to the food pantry and he was showing me around, and he took me to the cereal section, and I saw that there were Frosted Flakes, which at the time was my favorite cereal. Do you have those in Canada, Laura? Frosted Flakes? Okay. We don't live in the Antarctica. We have Frosted Flakes. So I said, well, why do they get Frosted Flakes, right? Because if they're poor, you should be eating healthy cereal. And my grandfather said, do you like Frosted Flakes? And I said, yeah, I love Frosted Flakes. And then he said, well, everybody should have Frosted Flakes. And I wish that I could say, oh, that was the attitude of a smarty pants child, but I actually see that attitude in lots of grownups. And I think that's possibly where I got that attitude from. Somewhere I had learned along the way that if you are the recipient of grace, you don't have the right to, I don't know, have fancy things. So the favorite things box tries to counter that attitude by saying to kids, we're going to put in this box, we're going to buy our favorite things and give of our favorite things for people in need. So you would put into it your favorite shampoo, your Frosted Flakes, all of the treats and the special things that you have, that practice. You could do it again as a family, or you could do it as a congregation. The second one is kind of tangential to it, and it's from my Easter book, which I'm going to shamelessly hold up, this one. And it's the idea of doing paper cones of flowers. So you just take a piece of like paper or hard paper and then make a little, put a ribbon on it. And then you have a basket and then you stick flowers in it. And then you can put that on a neighbor's door or anybody's door. The idea of giving something that you don't have to give, something frivolous, something that is sheer joy instead of a basic need, I think is a wonderful practice. We're in the season of Lent, and one of the 3 pillars of Lent is almsgiving. And the thing that I learned about giving alms from a Muslim imam that I'll pass on to you is that our duty as a people of faith is to give regardless of what we think the recipient of that gift will do with the gift. So sometimes people say, well, I don't want to give money to somebody on the street because how do I know how they'll use it? And the Muslim imam said to me, no, that's not the way. You just give and you expect that your gifts will be, it's not on you to decide what's done with them. And then the third piece that I said for giving as gratitude is also from my Easter book. And it's may seem counterintuitive, but it's the idea of modeling and teaching children about what it means to give to yourself. And the story that I say in the book is that I had heard once in a gathering like this, somebody said, I always teach children that the way to live a Christian life is to remember the acronym JOY. It's Jesus, others, and yourself should always come last. That's the Christian way. And I like the JOY idea, but I don't like the idea of saying that the Christian way is to put yourself last. I actually think that there is an argument to be made from scripture that out of like the overabundance that we have, we give to others. And so what would it look like to teach children to be kind to yourself, to do a loving kindness meditation for yourself first before you give to others? So those are my 3 practices for giving as gratitude. And now I promise, Laura, will get your book covers up lickety split, but I'm going to stop it between.
Well, I really just have the one static slide. And I'm also, I confess, going to talk about one of my own books, not to shamelessly promote it, but because it actually is relevant to this topic. What Grew in Larry's Garden is a book that really emphasizes the connection between mindfulness and gratitude. So how the practice of paying attention to the gifts that are all around us can actually become a spiritual practice that makes us more grateful. So mindfulness generates thanksgiving. The book basically tells the story of this little girl, Grace, who loves to help her neighbor Larry in his garden. And between the two of them, they grow these marvelous vegetables. And now and then, Larry drops these little hints that they're actually growing more than vegetables. But it's not until the neighbor builds a fence so high it blocks all the sun on the garden that Larry finally lets Grace in on the secret of what he plans to do with the tomatoes. And it's something that he's done before. He takes the tomato seedlings to school, distributes them to his students, and that's where the challenge begins. He challenges his students to go out and open their eyes and look around their community and pay attention to gifts that other people are giving, things people are doing that make their community better in some way. And then once the students have identified someone doing that, then it's not enough just to be, to feel gratitude, you have to express it. So they have to write a thank you letter and then hand deliver it to the person in question along with a tomato plant. So this is quite a challenge for the students. And some of the gifts that these students identify are very simple. Things like a bus driver who has kind words for every student in the morning, or the woman who spends so much time in her flower garden, but it really beautifies the whole neighborhood. So this book, Traci was talking about the joy of gifts, of giving and receiving. What Grew in Larry's Garden is, I think, a good book to help children expand their idea of different kinds of gifts. Gifts of time, gifts of shared talents. But it's also good for helping children pay attention and notice the gifts that are already there all around them. It is this practice of noticing that leads to gratitude. The other book I want to mention in this context is called Those Shoes. Now, this one's been around for a while, but I read it for the first time this year, and I was quite taken by it. In the story, Jeremy dreams of owning a pair of those shoes, the black high tops that all the other kids have. But as his grandmother tells him, there's no room here for want. It's all about need. And what Jeremy needs is winter boots. However, Jeremy convinces his grandma to take him thrifting. And lo and behold, they find a pair of the coveted black high tops. There's one little problem, though. They're too small. But Jeremy is so intent on having them, he thinks that he can put up with the pain in his feet just for the sake of having those shoes. So he uses his own money to buy them. But it doesn't work out because the pain is just too much. They are too small. And he finally has to confess that. But now what's he going to do with those shoes? Well, Jeremy happens to know exactly who could use those shoes, but it's hard to give them away. I really like this book for a couple of reasons. And the first reason is that we have this kid, Jeremy, who is accustomed to being the receiver. He is the receiver of the hand-me-downs. The sneakers he has are this ratty, ugly pair that his teacher has managed to forage for him. So he's always on the receiving end of somebody else's charity. But in this story, he gets the opportunity to be the one who is giving. And there's, I think, a real dignity in that choice. But the other thing I love about it is that choosing to let go of something you really love is hard. And there's not a lot of books that really portray that. It's like, oh, giving makes you feel so good. And it's hard. It's a hard discipline, even painful. But that's not a reason not to do it. So I highly recommend both of these books. Back to you, Traci.
When you say that, I feel like I should have like a weather map behind myself.
Yes,
back to you. Here I am reporting live from Giving, Grace, and Gratitude. So our next part is giving as repair. The idea that giving, and that second book was such a great launch into this, right? The idea that charity without justice can sort of fall flat. If we're trying to teach children what it means to give, are we teaching them to be are we teaching them to always be in a position of power where they give to others from this top down? And we're actually have a whole separate point about giving mutually. But the second point is about giving as repair, giving in terms of trying to create justice and a just world. And, when Laura and I were yammering on about how we wanted to do this webinar, and I have been telling everybody that will listen how much I have been affected by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg Greenberg's book on repentance and repair. I'm just really, the book has meant a lot to me this Lent. And so I'm just talking about it any chance that I can talk about it. And I even, have used it practically every day since I read it. And so I wanted to tell a brief story this morning about my son, kids doing kid things. And my son this morning, the dog was in his crate, and my son thought it would be funny to say to the dog, like, come on out, Clifford. But he was trapped in there. He couldn't come out. And it was kind of, I thought, mean and unkind. And because of that book, I started talking to Clayton about, well, if we do something that maybe we later realize is unkind, instead of being punished, how can we just repair what we did? How can we repair that? And so we decided together that the way he could repair that would be to spend extra time with Clifford today. So that's a gift to both of them, right? They'll be spending extra time together. So the idea of giving as repair. And I think in terms of practical ideas, there's 3 ideas that I had. 2 have to do with raising money, because honestly, when we're trying to deal with justice in our world, most organizations, they need money. So trying to come up with creative ways to raise money with kids, I think, is a worthwhile endeavor. So the first idea, this is one that we're doing this year in my congregation. It's an idea that I stole from a previous pastor, and they had done it before in the congregation. They called it Cups of Grace. And so everybody got a reusable coffee cup with a lid, and we gave it to everybody and said, if there's something that you would like to simplify this Lent, maybe you would go out for coffee, but you decided not to, or you would go out to dinner and you decided not to, maybe take the money that you would have spent and put it in your coffee cup. And then we'll bring these all back at the end. And we're giving our Cups of Grace to an organization called Days for Girls, which helps girls provide reusable menstrual products for school so that they can attend school. And the thing I love about that is it's the girls themselves form businesses where they manufacture and make the products. And so it's really contributing to a justice issue, not just charity. The second money idea I had for churches, maybe many of you have done this, I don't know, but I love it for a lot of reasons. It's just to take envelopes with any numbers, either 1 to 50 or 1 to 100, or you could do 1 to 200, whatever you wanted to do. And then you just lay them out, and people are invited to take the envelope and put in it the amount that's on the envelope and bring it back. And if you do the math for that, I think the 200 one is like $20,000 by the time you add all of those numbers up. But no one person is asked to give more than 200. And it's kind of a nod to the idea that we give as we are able. And then the third option, I think, Laura, you can be a big help. I know you will be in the next section with books, is just education, teaching children about issues of injustice and teaching what the problems are in our world and what opportunities we might have to solve them. So to have an opportunity to teach children about the issues of injustice in our world through picture books or moments for mission or story time. And here we go. Back to you, Laura.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit more than my fair share of time right now, because I actually have 2 sets of books to talk about. The first 2 deal more with economics and also reversing our expectations about who the givers and receivers are. And the second set looks at creation care as a form of stewardship. So set number 1, the first book I wanted to recommend or let you know about is called One Hen, How One Small Loan Made a Big Difference. And this is really a book about microloans in some ways. It tells the story of a boy called Kojo and his mother, and they're living in a fairly small village in Ghana, kind of struggling to make ends meet, as is everyone else in their village. None of the families has very much money, but they have a really interesting idea. Every family in the village pledges to donate or save and then donate a small amount of money. And then everyone agrees that they're going to put all of those savings together so that one family can borrow the whole amount to do something significant. So the first family to receive this loan buys a cartload of fruit, which they then take to market and sell at a profit. When they pay back the loan, Another family gets the money. They buy a sewing machine, and they make shirts and dresses and sell them, and so on. So Kojo kind of watches this process unfold and gets the sense of it. And he asks if he can have a few small coins to buy one hen. So he buys his hen, gathers the eggs, sells the eggs, saves the money from that, buys another hen. Pretty soon he's up to 5 hens. By the end of a year, he has 25 hens. The book continues to follow Kojo, excuse me, as he goes to school, then on to college, ultimately as he buys a farm and raises a family. And it all started with 1 hen. So I really like this book because it shows simply and clearly how generosity and giving can flow within a community. So it's not just something that flows from a privileged few to a needy group. All the people in the village take turns being givers and receivers. And I think that in our society, especially where we place so much emphasis on individual responsibility and consuming and accumulating wealth, there's something really refreshing and humbling to read about a different way, a kind of collective generosity that we don't always see. The second book is called 14 Cows for America. Again, both of these have been around for a while, but there's a good reason for that. 14 Cows for America literally brought tears to my eyes. I read it for the first time at work in the reading room of the library, and I was very moved by it. The author is a Maasai from Kenya who won a scholarship to study medicine in the United States. And he was in New York City on September 11th, 2001. He was devastated by what he witnessed. He writes, "My childhood heart told me what to do. Offer a sacrifice in the way of my people. To heal a sorrowing heart, give something that is dear to your own." So he decided to give his 1 cow, a symbol of life to the Maasai people. And that was going to be his offering to the grieving Americans. Well, you might ask, well, first of all, how do you give a cow and how is it actually helpful? This is more of a symbolic gift. The cow was not actually sacrificed. It was sort of set apart and pledged never to be sold. And there was a big ceremony. The officials from the American embassy in Kenya were invited. And so it was more an act of solidarity. But before that, the author went home to his village to share this story and explain why he wanted to give his cow as a gift. And his people were so stirred by his story that they decided to offer their precious cows as a symbol of hope and connection also. And this is how the book concludes. I just have to read this. "Because there is no nation so powerful it cannot be wounded, nor a people so small they cannot offer mighty comfort." 14 Cows for America is one of the few children's books I've come across that inverts our expectations about like the wealthy Western givers. It opens our eyes to this strange idea of valuable things being held in common and shared rather than privately owned. And it also shows us a kind of giving that's rooted in really deep empathy, a sacrifice that has a power to heal. Now, we can't talk about giving as repair without saying something about the earth and environmental stewardship. So Traci, if you don't mind, whoa, am I missing? Oh, there we go. Okay. That's okay. So I have 2 books about this, and they're kind of 2 sides of the same coin, and I'll explain what I mean. You Are Not Alone is by environmental educator Ellen Kelsey. She's written quite a few books, and they're all stunning. This one in particular. This is about the many gifts that the earth gives to us. So it's full of grace, but it's a grace that's flowing in our direction. And this is how it begins. "Every moment, this beautiful planet showers you with gifts. Clouds rain fresh water to quench your thirst. Your lungs swell with oxygen that plants create. Earthworms, ground beetles, and ants plow the soil where your vegetables grow. So every page in this book draws attention to how the earth nurtures and protects and heals, not just in a general way, but in ways that are very specific to a child's experience. And in a concluding note, the author explains why she wrote the book this way. She says, I want every kid to realize that warm, supportive community already exists for all of us. I want to look every kid in the eye and say, no matter what is happening in your life, you are never alone. Every plant on earth creates a bounty of oxygen to fill your lungs. This big, beautiful planet is alive, generously creating water, food, air, trees, rainbows, and countless other gifts. So, extraordinarily beautiful book. Here, the dot we call home emphasizes the other side of that reciprocal relationship we have. Our responsibility, both as descendants and ancestors, to take what we've been given, both good and bad, and to figure out what we want to pass on to those who come after us. So the message of here is that while the problems that the earth faces can be overwhelming, none of us faces them alone. Giving back to the earth is something that we discern and do together, starting right where we are. Hey, Traci.
This last one, giving as mutuality, is one that Laura and I have both referenced several times, and that the second book that you referenced, Laura, 14 Cows for America. If everybody on this call doesn't buy that book, I will be surprised. The author should now share royalties with you because it sounds amazing. I think this idea of mutual sharing when it comes to giving is probably, I don't want to rank our ideas. They're all fantastic ideas, but I do feel like the best is for last in a sense. And if there was one idea that I would love for us as kind of a collective church to try and work out, it's this idea that we all are givers and we're all receivers. And the story that I wanted to share about this, Laura's already heard it, so she'll take a nap, but it's a story of my family welcoming a refugee woman from El Salvador. We had a time in our life when we were welcoming refugee mothers and children into our home a couple days at a time, or weeks at a time, or months at a time, over and over. And one of the mothers, one of the first ones that came to the house, was on the back porch sweeping and cleaning up my back porch area. And I felt deeply uncomfortable about it. I felt nervous, like, does she not know she's a guest in our home? And so I said to my husband, who's Colombian, I feel so nervous and uncomfortable that I feel like she's cleaning our house and she should just be an honored guest. And my husband said, after everything that the family has been through, this woman has to give back. She wants to give back. It's a show of gratitude. And to insist that she not help is a show of power and actually disrespect. And that after having welcomed a number of women since then and learning the stories, my husband was actually absolutely correct. There is a sense of power in saying that I'm here to serve and you cannot give to me because I am the giver. And this is something that I see played out in the Latin American church in the US, as my husband's doing an immigrant new fellowship, and some of the partner churches don't want to accept some of the gifts that the partner churches are wanting to give back to them. And it feels uncomfortable, like, why? So I think to try and have this be something that we talk about from the time our children are little could be a really great opportunity. There's a practice in the First Faithful Families book called Receiving an Honored Guest. And it was inspired by my mom, because when my mom has somebody over, she always wants to make sure that you have the favorite soda in the refrigerator, the favorite, cereal in the morning. She wants to make sure that everybody is so happy and feels welcome. So the idea of having an honored guest and sitting the family down and talking about what would help this person to feel most welcome. Do they have a certain way that they need to sit? Are they in a wheelchair? So we need to make sure that we have a space at the table. What are the ways that we can make sure that our guest feels incredibly honored? And then also to teach, to flip that around and say, how can we be a good guest when we go to somebody else's house? How can we receive the gift of hospitality and generosity that's being offered in our family? That sometimes involves talking about maybe food that you wouldn't necessarily choose to make that is different from a different culture. The second one is with regard to flipping around the idea of when you are a server and when you are a guest. And it's so sad to me that so often churches, we have people serving at, say, a homeless shelter or a place where people are receiving food for the day, but then not sitting down at the table with the guests and eating. I think that if you can do that, that is such an opportunity and a welcome moment for everybody to sit together and enjoy the meal together. And of course, you have to, check with the organization you're with. But I think in general, that's a really fantastic practice. And then I think the third one is around the idea of modeling what it means to say yes to help. This is another really quick story about being in Guatemala. And in Guatemala, when I was on the bus, you sort of pay for your seat on the bus. And so my friend put their bag next to them. And so then they had to pay for the bag to sit there. And we learned that this was the system when a woman got on the bus with all of her children. And then she started handing them out to us to put them on our laps so that she wasn't paying for all the spots, like free lap, free baby. And we loved it. It was so fun to have these babies and children on our lap on the bus. And then later when I had children, my two children first two were born very quickly together. And so I couldn't always carry them. And so sometimes I would have to have somebody hold on to the baby for me so that I could get them in the car seat or whatever. And I always felt uncomfortable about that until one day I remembered that time in Guatemala when somebody gave me their baby and how happy I was. And I realized, when you give somebody the gift of helping them, it's like handing them a baby, right? And I think the way we can model that to children, and pastors, I'm looking at you because pastors get so wiggly and uncomfortable. I just was talking to a pastor friend who is on disability because she is ill and just very uncomfortable with the idea that she would be needing meals and needing to help from her community. And I reminded her of this story that by receiving help, we are teaching people what it means to be generous receivers as well as givers. So that simple third practice is, if you're a grown-up in any child's life, to model and to show what it means when somebody calls and says, is there anything I can do, to say, yes, actually, I would love any help that you could give. Could you bring over some items I need? It's deeply uncomfortable. A lot of people, it gives us the heebie-jeebies to think about doing that. But to say yes to help and to model that for our communities is a great gift and an honor. Laura, I'm going to get up your last marvelous books for us to see.
Okay. I love your stories, Traci, because they remind me anyway how much giving and receiving is just integrated into all of these dimensions of our lives. So it's not just something that we do at church or a specific practice. It's a whole way of being. So I chose two books. I know there's a lot of overlap here, but I thought these two kind of represented this idea of mutuality and being both giver and receiver. And the first is a new one by Sandra Bradley. It's called Cocoa Magic. It's got a very old-fashioned feel about it, as you can tell from the cover. It's set in the 1920s, I think, Prince Edward Island. It's about a little boy named Daniel who loves to help his great uncle Louis in his chocolate shop. And one day, a new student comes to Daniel's school and looks utterly miserable. Daniel smiles at her, tries to make her feel welcome, but she's completely unresponsive. So instead of taking offense, Daniel uses that as an opportunity to start wondering. He starts to wonder how this other girl might be feeling. Even to him, the school sometimes feels very cold and unwelcoming. So how would it feel to somebody who knows no one? From that moment of empathy and imagination, an idea grows. The next morning, not yet. Go back. The next morning, Daniel hides a chocolate in the new girl's desk. And then he does the same thing the next day and the next. And it seems to be helping. The new student is noticeably more cheerful. So Daniel starts to pay attention to the rest of his class, and he notices, okay, well, some of them look like they could use a little bit of cheering up too, and even his teacher. So he's a veritable chocolate factory, sort of secretly hiding these gifts everywhere. And the more gifts Daniel gives, the happier everyone seems to be, and the kinder and more patient they are with one another in their classroom. So Daniel is delighted that this project of his seems to be sweetening the whole school, and not a soul knows where the treats are coming from. Or do they? I really like this story for a couple of reasons. First, because it's very rooted in the child's own empathy and kindness. There is absolutely no force or coercion involved. There's no guilt. Second, the gifts are given anonymously, not for the sake of any kind of reward other than just the joy and seeing the pleasure that they give other people. Finally, I like it because in the end, Daniel does become both giver and receiver. His classmates have learned from this experience of his generosity, and so when he is in need, they take care of him. So the gifts, again, are flowing both ways and transform the whole classroom. So it's a sweet and lovely story. Another one, Jesse's surprise gift. This is a story about not holding on to things too tightly and the surprises that can happen when you dare to let go. Jesse's a little boy who wants a guitar more than anything in the world. His mother cannot afford to give him one, so she does what she can, which is to give him a little clay flute. He meets someone who actually needs the flute more than he does, and so he decides to pass it on. He does receive something in return, and as he goes through the day, the same thing happens over and over again. He keeps meeting somebody in need, and he's confronted with this choice. Does he hold on to what he has, or does he take the risk of passing it on and seeing what happens? And in the end, it's this practice of continually letting go and giving away, which makes a difference not only to the people who are receiving these gifts, but it also ultimately leads Jesse to the guitar that he's been longing for. And I think that it's kind of a launching point to talk about something that's key to our churches, because I think that often fear holds us back from giving. We're so afraid that we won't have enough. So we really hang on to our resources. And it's good to have a reminder sometimes not to be afraid, but to be brave and see what happens. And I thought I would conclude my book recommendations. Traci, if you can flip ahead. Yeah. Just by, again, I'm going to read a short passage from this book, Make Room, since we're finding ourselves in the middle of the season of Lent right now. This is the moment when Jesus kneels to wash his disciples' feet. Before the meal, Jesus took a cloth, a bowl, and a pitcher of water. He got down on his knees and washed his friends' feet, which were dirty and sore from walking. That is who Jesus is. He pours himself out like water from a pitcher. He touches what is dirty and hurting and makes it clean and whole. Jesus told his friends, "This is what you must do for each other. Love one another as I have loved you." I center in on that moment because I think there we see the pattern of generosity by which Jesus lives. He doesn't cling on to things, not to possessions or privilege or status, but he pours out what he has and who he is for the sake of those he loves. And then he tells those who follow him to do the same. So in other words, we kind of come down to what I think is at the heart of generosity. We give because Jesus tells us to and shows us how. I have to say, the concept of sacrifice is difficult and problematic in many ways, especially when we apply it to the death of Jesus as payment for sin. That's a whole other webinar right there. But I don't think we can deny that the entire life and ministry of Jesus has this sacrificial shape. Self-giving is woven as a pattern throughout the life of Jesus, and it lies at the heart of the Christian understanding of generosity as grace, the giving of gifts not as payment or reward, but as an expression of love. So as part of Jesus' family, that pattern is part of our identity too.
So lovely, Laura. That's a beautiful way to end, I think. And your last paragraph there, I would love to read it. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. And we do have a few minutes left for folks if they have questions or comments or ideas. As I mentioned, you can raise your hand using the tools of Zoom. You can enter a question into the chat box or a comment, as it were, and so on, any ideas you have. And as we're waiting to see if anybody does come forward with some thoughts and so on, I will offer one of my own, which was when you were talking about the envelopes. It made me think there's a way of perhaps making it a little bit more accessible to children who are less likely to have $200 and so on. But and we in Canada, we don't have pennies as you do in the States, but, nickel increments on envelopes and so on, so that the most a child might be giving, if you had, 20 kids, it's going to be $1 and so on. But that children could be picking up an envelope to be donating with as well, so that they could pair up with their parents and so on in doing something like that. So wonderful idea.
I think that's so lovely. And I just have to laugh a little bit. I don't know, Laura, if we've ever talked too much about the context that I'm serving in at church, but I'm definitely in a very privileged context, a suburb of Chicago, where if you're looking out at the parking lot, there would be cars of brands that would have some recognition as to their feeling on how much money is a lot of money and not a lot of money. So I agree and apologize for making such a weird statement about it. I will say though, we did that envelope thing in our church, and it was for resettling an Afghani family from Afghanistan. And the family had something like 14 children. And so it required the envelopes. I think we did 1 to 100. It required 3 churches doing all of that. It was a lot of money. And everybody, the whole families got into it and just really, really loved it. And it was a great way to have something tangible for something so abstract, right? So strange and abstract. And yeah, I could yammer on.
I think it's brilliant. Part of what I was looking at too is the importance of modeling, but then giving the child an opportunity to participate. Yeah. So it might be that mom and dad pick up the $50 envelope. They might pick up a 5-cent or a 50-cent envelope or something like that, and that they can, that there's that echo.
The tooth fairy money.
It's wonderful. Do we have any questions or comments out in the audience, as it were, the participants in this?
Christine, I'd raise my hands. I love the envelopes. I think that is just amazing. My question is, do you see these books? They're beautiful. They're just absolutely beautiful. Do you see them used mostly as a teaching tool in the home, or is there some way you could incorporate that into a children's program in the church?
Absolutely, yes. Yes to all of it. They could be used in the home. I like to use picture books a lot in intergenerational worship, often with some sort of activity or response that's tied to it in some way, in which everyone can participate, not just the children. If you happen to use, now there's always the question of getting permission to use the artwork, but in our church, we have a projector and a screen where we share art. And so if it's an intergenerational service, if I'm sharing a book just with the children, I'll just read it old school and hold it in my lap. If it's for the entire congregation, I'll often scan the artwork with permission and then share it and make that the centerpiece of the service. And as I say, create some kind of a response activity that involves everyone. But I mean, you could also incorporate the books in midweek programs. So there's lots of potential there.
If I could just add a couple of ideas for picture books in worship, because I use them a lot. I read picture books in worship almost every week during the moment for young disciples. Sometimes we don't read the entire one, try to find a place to put it in there. And then the other thing that I've been just on a really large, evangelism tour about over the past few years is encouraging churches to have their own little picture book lending libraries for their congregations, if you can afford it, but to also take a long view of it, to say to families, when it's your child's birthday, if you'd like to buy one for your family, how could you go ahead and have a separate space where you just collect one, even if you got 4 books a year, and then you had a library where people could take them and bring them back. You add up, your books add up, and there's so many amazing ones. It's such a great way of teaching.
There was a question in the chat list that was asking, how does one go about getting permission to be able to use artworks and so on? In fact, one of them was about one of your books, Laura.
Yeah, if you go to the publisher's website, so Amanda, you asked about the Dot We Call Home. Paraclete Press is the publisher of that. If you go to their website, down on the bottom, there's actually a tab or a hyperlink for permissions. You can go there, just send a message and say, we'd like to have permission to share this artwork in the context of worship. And in my experience, in most cases, the answer is as long as you credit the author, the illustrator, and the publisher, and it's not something that's going to be up on YouTube in perpetuity, there's usually not a problem getting permission for that.
Before we go to Brenda's wonderful observation, I was going to, when you spoke of the evangelization tour, I thought, oh, she's going to go down, and Laura, undoubtedly, as one who works in library experiences and so forth, as an educator, we all love being read to, children and adults alike. And so the use of picture books and books of whatever variety, including the adult chapter books, as used to grow up, you'd be into chapter books, but is the use of books and reading aloud. There is a real receptiveness to that. So I think that's a wonderful piece as well. I saw a wonderful observation from one of our participants, Brenda, who talked about what their church did, sharing $5 with every family and letting that family decide what they were going to do with it, and how some of them got together, some gave it away, some used it to do something else, and so on. And then came back and shared those experiences. And I think that's actually really part of the lesson there, is what can be done with it. And it's an echo of some of the stories in your books, Laura.
Yeah,
observations.
It reminds me a lot of One Hand, actually. And, some of the families deciding to collaborate and put that money together and seeing what can we do with this. In my church, we have something called a time and talent auction. And it's different in the sense that people aren't given seed money from the church, but they do put forward some talent or ability that they have. It could be anything from, babysitting. We have a lot of teens who offer that, car detailing and washing in the spring. Somebody will come and rake your leaves. Somebody maybe has a cottage and offers it for a week. And then the community gathers and auctions it all off. And it's sort of, it's a fun night. It's community builder, but it's a fundraiser as well.
I've known a lot of churches that do that, Laura. And as you're talking, it makes me think, I don't know if I'm sure if you have done this, let me know, like a church that has done that with a focus on younger people, like what it would be so cool to have a time and talent type auction where all of the times and talents are things that children are offering, cookies that they're making or a craft that they could make. I mean, who doesn't love a kid's picture on their refrigerator, right? Like how much is that worth, right? I think that could be a really, really exciting, energetic way to get children, I'll play you your own custom happy birthday to you, plunk it out on the piano. That could be really valuable. And it could also balance this idea of like, children don't have wallets with money in them, but they have so many talents and things to offer. I think that could be really.
My thoughts exactly is it pushes back against the purely monetary, and it in French, they have a word valoriser. We need a word like that in English, but it uplifts the notion of the gifts and the importance of that giving as well. And that makes a difference to the church directly or indirectly.
I was just going to say, Christine, that in Montessori education, valorization is used to describe that sense of purposefulness that you want to inculcate in children and young people as they grow, a sense of their ability to offer something that's purposeful. And Traci, I was thinking about time and talent. One year we had the children paint birdhouses, and you've never seen birdhouses go for such inflated prices, but it was a lot of fun, both the painting and the auctioning off.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that's just making my brain go crazy. And I have to tell one story about teens doing something in one of my very first congregations, because I think it also speaks to like some of the unique giftedness of teens at that age, where they have just really clever sense of humor. So there was this one time that the youth in the church were going to do a car wash in my church, and it got rained out. And so the next day, the Sunday of church, they put out the bucket and the things, and they said, virtual car wash, give us your money and we won't wash your car. And like, there was all these jokes about it. They were saying like, they don't want us to poorly wash their car anyway. And like all of these funny things. And so they, then when they were standing there on Sunday morning, people were like, oh, haha, very funny. And they were like, Mr. Alary, like, we know that you didn't want us to mess up your car anyway. And like, so they did the math. They ended up making way more money on this non-car wash, right? That they ended up doing it for years. But I thought that was super sweet and clever. So I'm just talking about fun.
Outstanding. Thank you. We've come to the end of our time. And so I do want to extend my thanks, first of all, of course, to the presenters. And you were the honored guests in our house, but by golly, we were the ones who received so much more, giving from your abundance of enthusiasm and ideas and experience and your faith. And we really appreciate that. And you talked about the favorite things box, but I thought I'd heard you also use the term the hopeful box. And this is helping to fill my hopeful box for the future, for our children, and for God's kingdom as it comes. So we thank you so very deeply for your time, talents that you've given to us. And I will just make a couple of last comments for the folks who are attending, which is, this was the second webinar of our spring series. We've recorded it. It will be posted on the YouTube channel of the Archdiocese of Regina and the YouTube channel of the Diocese of Qu'Appelle. And we encourage you to share that with everybody that you know so that they can watch it. And this can be shared anywhere. It's not a Saskatchewan only thing. We will be sending out evaluations. This was a very popular topic, and it came about because of the suggestions of people who filled out their evaluations. So please fill out and return your evaluations. We'd love that. Thank you again, Laura and Traci. And now I'm going to ask Father John Weckend, who is also a priest and a member. He's a member of the Ecumenical Stewardship Planning Committee and is a priest in the Archdiocese of Regina, serving in the city of Regina. John, if we could turn to you to close us in prayer. John, we're not hearing you. He was here a minute ago. I saw him. Well, perhaps in his either muted or absence, I will say a brief prayer on our behalf. Good and gracious God, we thank you for this time to come together, to learn, to laugh, and to look to a future in which all our hearts are open to the gifts of children, and that we may all move forward as one. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. We'll see you again